So I'll pass you over. We're covering this today. I covered this with Patrick a couple of times actually over the last couple of weeks as we were tweaking, because there's a lot to cover. It's a really, really good session. It's a follow-on, by the way, of a session Patrick recorded for us, and it's on our video hub on the previous session for Apex. If you actually want to follow along, there's kind of 3 sessions that we did on this, and there might even be a 4th. We have to see where we go on that. So Patrick, I'll pass over to you and stop talking, and best of luck.
So warm welcome also from my side. As you see, leverage machine learning using Oracle Apex is the topic. So as Tom mentioned, we tried to move on from where we stopped last time, where we showed you how easy or how interesting it could be to approach Apex, and that you don't need a lot of prerequisites to work with Apex because there is a lot of stuff already in there. This time we wanted also to show how Apex and machine learning, which is integrated in the database, works nicely together. So with this, I'll take over the sharing and share my slides. On my slides, now you should see, I hope it's fine, Tom. You see my slide? Okay, perfect. So you see, we bring together many different components. One of those is Apex, like we talked before. So to see how can we extend Apex or use Apex more explicitly to extend machine learning on the database side. We also use some tools on the autonomous database itself, like SQL Developer, and we are leveraging on a machine learning part. So what are we going to do with the machine learning part? So we decided with Tom that maybe a nice example of doing something like that could be a credit score. Let's say we start with some data somewhere. And here, let's move on to the slide. So we start with some data, which in our case comes from an Excel file, which can be brought from sales or from someone else in the team. And then we move on to transform this data, to do work on this data in the direction of machine learning. Let's say we prepare the data, we do some business modeling to get some data insights, and then we do the whole magic with the machine learning stuff inside the database, and then we try to display it, or let's say to integrate it in a maybe already existing or maybe a newly built Apex application. So this is the way we're gonna go. We start with the loading, and there we maybe use the SQL Developer. We'll show that in a minute. Then we're gonna use the machine learning part. We also get a bit deeper on that. Finally, we explain a bit about the machine learning part in the autonomous database. And finally, we're gonna display it on an Apex application. So let's move on. What's the way we're going to work with the data? We're going to work with Jupyter Notebooks, which is just one way of using Oracle Machine Learning, OML. And we will see in the next slide that there is not just this way to use machine learning, because we have many interfaces to use machine learning. This is one of the most approachable, most easy ways, even for people like me, which are not data scientists, because I'm a guy with a strong database background, but I'm not a data scientist or so. But even for me, it's quite easy to do my first steps in machine learning, let's say. And so the notebooks are one way to work through the data, to say, create tables, to manipulate them, to create models, and so on. But we will see that later on, even in a demo. And here we have, as I mentioned, we have different ways to work with machine learning in autonomous, but not just in autonomous, also in on-premise work. But here we see, we have the OML for SQL, which means you can use directly SQL statements inside the database to work, to elaborate data, to do the machine learning. What's the great advantage of this? You have the data already in the database. You don't have to extract it, bring it to another server, maybe also change the format and save it on another server. You can do it directly in the database. And that's the great advantage. That's the great advantage because you're saving time, you're saving resources, you're doing it in place. And that's what makes it faster and sometimes even more performant. We can do it even with R, OML for R. Most of the scientists already work with R. Maybe they have already routines or stuff in place with R. So you can directly connect it and recycle maybe stuff you already prepared or you're already working on, but you can connect it directly with APIs to the database. Same for for Python in this case. OML for Py, which means you can use your Python libraries to work through the machine learning part and connect it seamlessly with the database. The notebooks, which we are going to use, and where you will see that's quite easy to work on them. And already in the notebooks, you can do nice reports because you can insert also kind of a markup language, you can insert pictures, you can do a lot of display options and so on. And we will see how this works and that it's not that complicated to work on that. We'll see that in just a minute. There are also the data mining extension, the OML, sorry, this was too fast. OML for Spark and also OML for microservices. Now that we are always talking about cloud native and so on, we also have this interface with the microservices. And if I'm right, Tom, there will be also more information in following sessions about those cloud native stuff and so on.
Yeah, you're right. There's one we did, I think about 4 or 5 weeks back, Patrick, and there is another one coming up.
Yeah, so if you're interested, stay tuned and follow also this session. So next, before I start, I wanted also to represent it so that you see the flow we're following. You see, first we start with the CSV file from Excel. We'll bring that eventually either on directly into the database to create a table, or maybe through an object storage, depending on what's your setup and how you want to do it. Then we're going to do the magic inside the database with the machine learning part. And so it works. First, we bring the file on the database. Then we create the tables. We do the magic in the machine learning. On top of that, we create an application. And finally, to make it more reusable and maybe more interesting, we create also a REST API, which can be used to get the result. Let's say we talked about what is our demo showing. Our demo is going to show credit scoring. In this case, we will see we create this API interface where we insert some additional data and it gives us directly an answer. So you can also use all you created here for maybe already existing software or already existing services you have, and getting a kind of a JSON answer, which then can be reused in something you already built. Or maybe you will reuse it also in another place. But we will show you that everything you do, you can reuse it, and you build it once, you use it more than twice. So with this, I give you a short overview of what we're going to show in the demo now. And so I'm switching over to the other screen where we go directly into the demo. And now I hope you see my environment in the cloud. Tom, you said yes, so I think
all good.
Great. So as we mentioned before, we said, okay, it's about loading the data. Those of you who already worked with Autonomous Database or so know that we can go just into the database and load the data. But wait, I was missing one step. The first step I want to do, as we're working on machine learning and so on, is to create a user. So let's go back to the autonomous database. Sorry, here we go. And you see, I already created in perspective of time, because we are going to show a lot of stuff. I created most of the parts, so I just show you where to find it. And so you don't have to wait for the load operations, you don't have to wait for the create operations and so on. I try to make it quite easy, quite fast, so that you can follow the flow and don't have to wait for that stuff. So the first step is create an autonomous database. In the autonomous database, we're going to create a machine learning user, because this is the user where we're going to load up all that stuff. And to do so, once we are in the autonomous database, we go under tools. And here you see Oracle Machine Learning Administration. And that's important. It's a bit different. It's administration. So the first time you access it, you go on this side and access the machine learning part with your admin user. Once you're connected with your admin user, I already had a session open and ready. And here you see, I already created this user. To create a user, that's very easy. You just say create, you give it a name, you give your email address, and then once you take away this tick, you also can directly insert this password. And once you do so, you'll have this user created. If you create the user like we did in the machine learning part, you need also to access another part of the autonomous database. So let's go back to the autonomous database and go in here. And I don't know if some of you already know, if you go in the database actions, you have a lot of actions you can do. So once we go in here, we can access all the tools which are possible. Let's see if it saved the right password. I suppose yes, as it moves on. And here you see we have a lot of tools. And this is why in the very first slide, I said Apex, machine learning, but also autonomous database. Because on the autonomous database, you see we can either work with the SQL Sheets, which is the web developer. So you have an SQL developer ready to go, used from a browser. And you also have very nice things like the data load. And we're going to use it more than once, or I'm going to show you because we need it more than once. So the first thing, as I mentioned, when we created this user in machine learning, we also have to add some other functionalities to this user so that we can connect the machine learning user also to the SQL developer, so that we can do some of the tasks we have to do with the SQL developer. So the first time we connect with the admin user and assign some grants or some privileges to this machine learning user. I already did it, so I don't have to do it again. And once we go back, we see that here we have all the functionalities we had before. So we created the user, we assigned some of this privilege so that the user is able to work. And then we're gonna use the data load. And here you see we have the data load. We can do it with a link, with a feed. We can go with a local file, another database storage. We're gonna go with the local file and say just next. And here we just can drag and drop the file we wanted to use. If you recall what we said before, I showed you in this little schematic demonstration, we say, okay, let's select a file. And as you see, I downloaded some files to get through this demo. One of our first files we're going to use is this credit scoring 100K. As this is a 45 megabyte file, you see it's quite large. I already loaded it in the user. So you just can say, okay, get this file, open it, and then you can say load it. It's quite easy, straightforward, no big deal. Once you've done so, we loaded this data and we have our first step done. So we created the table. If you recall, we created the table from the file. So we already did our first step. So next step will be to work on the notebooks. So there comes the machine learning part. And how are we gonna use this? Okay, first, we already created the machine learning user, as you recall here. And now we're gonna connect with this machine learning user. What do we have to do? So the easiest way I found to enter the machine learning, because as you see here, this is machine learning administration. It's used to create the user, to manage the user, but not to access it. Where do we go to access it? Well, we go under Service Console and under Development. Here we have the notebooks. And this is, as I mentioned before, the way we're gonna work on it. So let's say workbooks. This time we're gonna use the ML user, not the admin user, and say, okay, log in. Once we log in the machine learning part, you see we have a lot of information. And the upper part adds all the help pages. So here, if you go with this sites, it explains you how to work with it. If you click on them, you go directly in the help, in the documentation, and it will show you how to work on it. Underneath, you see the quick actions, and this is where we're gonna end up. And the most important part for us are the notebooks. So we're gonna work with those notebooks. And to show you how easy it is, we say, okay, notebooks. I already created 2 notebooks, but I'm gonna explain you something. You just say create, give the notebook a name, and then you can say, you give a comment. If you share these notebooks to other people, we will see you have the ability to share them, to export them, to import them, and this will be one of our next steps. But first, just to show you how easy it is, we're gonna enter the very first easy notebook we created. You just go here. Once you say created, you'll get on the same page as we do now. It takes a while because it reads all the information. It also gets the information, let's say it executes the paragraphs inside the notebooks, because as we see here, we have different paragraphs and you just can create them. One of the very important things to understand is that there are some quotes in the very beginning of the paragraph. For example, here we have this MD, which means markup language. So you see what we set in here as text, or let's say as script, if you want so. Underneath, you get it as a result, just a simple text as a HTML text or so. Then we have also a part which is SQL, which means we can execute SQL. You see here, select star from ML user credit score. You recall maybe we loaded this data before. And then we also can do a graphical representation. So some more.
Can I just interrupt you for, it's probably just worth raising this just to explain. I've just been answering a couple of questions. There's some we need to answer live, by the way, but I'll come back to you that at the end. Okay. Just something to be aware of on this is a live lab. Obviously, we've only got an hour, so Patrick is kind of cutting at the chunkier bits and just preparing it. But it's something worth noting when we were practicing this credit scoring part, machine learning credit scoring. is not small. So it's not a kind of a slick demo where they're just trying to, add 5% or subtract one mount from another, multiply it by 2. We're not talking about really simple credit scoring. What you're going to see with Patrick as he goes down through this is it's really detailed and more on par with a real one, right? So, so what we're trying to do is we're not trying to overpitch or underpitch something. What we're saying is you can do really a lot of stuff here, and more on that in a second when we actually see the application, because that's probably something we'll cover. So just to prepare it, and also, by the way, there's a lot of data here. We didn't actually, I don't think we checked the row count, but it's a lot. So it's not 10 or 20 rows that we're talking about here. So sorry, Patrick, just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Tom. It's, as Tom mentioned, it's a lot of stuff. In this part, we just wanted to show you that there could be some easy parts to approach it, where you say easy select statements, which are then represented as a table or even as graphics. You also can, for example, in this case, we inserted with this setup, you can also insert titles or hide it or so on. And what's also quite interesting to notice, if you do your first steps, you see the script and you see the result. In the very top, you see you can hide or show the script, you can hide or show the result, and there's always this play symbol, which means you can execute it. This execute is always possible either for the whole notebook, if you do it on the top, or you can do it paragraph by paragraph. So as you see here, if you just want to do this part or the other part, you can do it just by clicking so. Okay, so now you've seen how to create. You see here, it's already waiting. You just can put in some text and then execute it. And then you get this result. So this is for the first steps. If you want to move further, if you want to do more, there are two interesting things. One is, if we go back to the home, you see in the quick actions, there are already examples. If you go in these examples, you see this could give you some hints, some ideas. You see how it works, how we can work on it. Maybe you take this as an example and then you do your own stuff because you need kind of abnormally detection or something like that. So here, this is just to give you some ideas, what you want to do. And you just can go in here, you go under home, and in the examples, you see what is possible, okay? Usually, we are not alone when we work. And usually you have proficiency or the skills on different parts. And even here, you can do this separation of duty. So we mentioned before, maybe you get your information from another part of the company, which gives you this Excel file or this CSV file. And then you have the programmers, which do the interface and so on. And then maybe you have this data scientists, which create this notebooks for you. And in this case, we wanted to show you, if we go back to the notebooks, you see I already created this easy one, but I also have a way more complicated one. Where did I get it? I can say import, and there I have the possibility to import JSON documents, where someone else already prepared it for me, someone who knows about data, someone who knows how to work with models, because like me, I don't know how to work with models, but I had someone who prepared it for me. So he gave me this JSON file. I just did upload this JSON file, and it created directly this whole notebook for me, okay? And here we see this is way more complex than the easy one we started with, okay? You see here, we get a nice explanation text. We get graphics in it. We get more explanation. We also get links to GitHub repositories, again, a graph. And here we start with scripts. You see, then here it becomes interesting. And the most interesting part is that once you get this information, you can customize it to your own situation. How to do so? In the right upper corner, you always see this gear where you see, okay, here you have your sources, where you get your information from. In our case, you have this markup language, but you also have the connectivity to our autonomous database. And these are the connectivity strings to our autonomous database. Where to find it? In the right upper corner here. And then you just put it as you need it, and then you say save. And so the notebook knows where to retrieve the data. Here again, as we mentioned before, you can execute this paragraph all in one or paragraph by paragraph. Maybe you don't need to re-execute all that text part, but maybe sometimes you did changes on the data. So you try to find the scripts or the SQL, then you execute it, and in the bottom, you see when they have been executed last time. So it could be interesting for you. Maybe you don't want to display all the scripts. So you can say, okay, I hide the scripts. So it becomes a real nice overview of all the data. Another thing we wanted to show you, as it is this way, is that you can put in a lot, you can do a very nice work, even here in the notebook. So you can use this as a report, okay? But you can also use it to train the database. You see here the display of some data, the evaluation of some data, and later on also the training. Here you see model building. It could happen that maybe a statement doesn't work out as you meant to. So you just can say, show me the script and work on that. That's not a problem. You just can click in it and work on that. So maybe you have to adjust some scripts or so. And then finally, you see, okay, we did also the training with 60/40, where you say, okay, we use 60% of the data to do the training. And finally, we did 40% for the execution. And here you see the script. I just can say, show me the script. And this is what we did, okay? And as we mentioned before, this is in sake of separation of duty. So not the developer has to do hard-coded all that stuff in the code, because we all know that if you have to change something and you have to go through all that codes, maybe sometimes it takes a long time. And here, he can pass it over. So you separate also the working times. So maybe the application developer does his application, the data scientist does these models and has already the results in a viable way. So he can read it and see, okay, this displays how we want to be displayed. And then he can work through all the data and maybe also give a summary and an explanation of how to manipulate what happened, how is this data manipulated, what kind of models are inserted, are used, or so. Let's again see the scripts. Maybe we see in the code what it's doing. As I mentioned before, I'm not a data scientist, so I don't really know what's best for it. But as you see here, okay, he says good credit, he works on that. He created even tables, he created views. So you really can do the whole approach of working on the data in these notebooks. Once finished, what we can do with these notebooks. We see here, we can use even them as a report and send them to someone else, share them among our team or so. So it's great. What's also interesting is you can also export these trainings, these models and that stuff and copy it to another database if you want to do so. But what we are going to do now is we're going to move over and integrate it in an Apex. And how is this? So first we go back to our autonomous database. So we've seen we use the SQL developer to insert the data, to say create the table, to upload the data, and so on. Next, we went to the machine learning part. in the machine learning part, we manipulated the data. We created additional views, additional tables. It did his magic with machine learning stuff, where he used the algorithms already integrated in the database, and he learned about how to approach the data and so on. Next, what we're going to do is we enter the application express. So, as you see, I already created my workspace. For those of you who don't know it, first you have to create a workspace. I did it on the same user as you see here, on the machine learning user. So you can also create Apex workspace on top of something you already created, either with machine learning or even with SQL Developer. So once we're in here, I give it a name. I give the workspace a name. I use the user. I have already inserted the password, and we'll go into it. The easiest way, even here, separation of duty, reuse of resources, stuff like that. How can we create such an application? Easy as that. You don't have to build it from scratch. Maybe someone did it already for you, and you can say import. And even here, drag and drop. And also here, I already have this application already created, okay? So I just can reuse what someone else built maybe on another system, and I can reuse it. I don't have to build it on my own. I can say, well, I base it on what you already created, or I extend something someone else already created. I just say, okay, import this file, and then say next, next, next. And the result will be, we get this application. So, nice application. What can we do with it? Let's first have a look what's in this application. In this application, we see it looks like a simple, classical Apex application. And here we can say, okay, we have the list of the users, which are already created. I can go for one of these users. For example, I wanted Mr. Bakker. Let's see if I get that. Here we go. And then I also select the name. And here we get some of his data, the likely prediction accuracy, and so on. And here we see the prediction is other credit, which means he has not such a good credit score. We can, okay, we can see the whole list. And here we see this, for example, is one of the columns which has been calculated. We had all those information about what's his occupation, what's his wealth situation, what's his income, and then it gets this prediction if he has a good credit score or he has a bad credit score, okay? And he does it with machine learning behind the scenes. And here we can then display it either in a usual way, in a table, but we can also use it to create such summaries. And here we get visuals like we have on the notebook, yes, but maybe we need it in an Apex application for another use case or so. And as you see, we can just integrate it in some other applications. And this is why we wanted to show you that you can do the work behind the scenes and with machine learning, preparing this data. And as you see here, customer upload, even here, I uploaded another file and it created this ad hoc. So once you prepared the model, you just can say reload this data, and it created also these graphs on the data we uploaded afterwards. So you create the model once and you feed it with more data, and based on a model already created, he does the calculation and displays it in real time. So,
Patrick, can I just yeah, because I remember when we were going through discussing this, it's probably worth just keeping in mind here. We've kind of moved the complexity of any of this code that you would normally write in an application, where you go, let's write it in here that we're going to do credit scoring. That's typically what people would do. So what we've done is just put it in a magic place, some magic other location that's handling all of this for us. And it just means that the production of these Apex applications, or indeed anything, doesn't, you know, if you're not using Apex and you're using something else, the same thing applies. It just means that the simplification of your application, or your applications, have become much, much simpler when you go to create them. That's really something people should keep in mind. That's the kind of big win. You want to really, if you're under huge pressure to thump out a lot of applications really quickly, machine learning is definitely something you should be considering.
Exactly. And also the fact of the separation of duty. So you can work in parallel, because you have, for example, the developers of the Apex application working on it as long in the same time where you have the data scientists working on the notebooks, and no one has to wait for the other. So you can really speed up the development. And as you mentioned, you also have the advantage of reuse stuff, because you create it once, and maybe there are some templates or some stuff you can reuse again and again and again. You just have slightly changes. And as we've seen before, either the JSON files for the notebooks, but also the application files with SQL files can be used to just import the most of the work. And maybe just you have to tweak some stuff. And then, as we showed before in our schematic view, I just want to add one more thing where you say, okay, nice. You showed me I can load my data with the CSV files. I can do the magic with the machine learning on the notebooks. I created this application, but maybe I need this data also somewhere else. So I can also expose it very easily with the REST API. How to do so? So, well, we can just enter here on this application. Wait. So we, as you, maybe this was a bit fast. So let's go back in the application. Start it again. Okay, here we are on the application. If you're on the application, you just go in the home, under the workshop, and here we see RESTful services. Okay, we go into this RESTful services. Under modules, we need to create a new model. Once we created this module, we just have to give it a name and the base path, nothing more. Once we've done so, we just say, okay, create a template. So we created this template. And even here, we just insert the URL we're going to use. You see here, maybe it's not clear, but I'll explain it to you. You see wealth and income. What does this mean? This means we create a URL which afterwards can be used as input. So it's once you call this URL, you can also pass some information through it. So next step will be to create this handler, and the handler is a get function. In this get function, we say it's a one-row query, and we insert the query underneath. And here you see we use this variables we're passing here. We have wealth and we have income. And once we created all of this, you see the full URL. What does this mean? This means we can use this URL, just copy it, and then, just a moment, because as you see in this URL, at the end, you have these two variables, which we have to change, okay, so that we get a result. So I already prepared this string or this URL. And once we put this URL in our browser and say, okay, you see, we inserted that the wealth is rich and that his income is 20,000. And once we call this URL, we get this JSON answer that the credit score is good. And so you see, you just can call this URL we created on top of this application, and you can reuse this model, this calculation, also in other, let's say, applications, in other services, and so on. So we did the whole stack from starting from a CSV file, loaded it into the database, brought it again into the machine learning part where we did the calculation. And finally, we did also on top of it, let's see it again. So I'll share you again this model. You see, we brought this CSV file in, created the tables, did the magic on the machine learning, created the application, and then created a REST API on top of this application. So with this, I am at the end of my demo, and I give back to Tom. And I really want to thank you for your attention. And I really hope that you've seen that most of this is quite easy in the approach. Maybe one last thing, if you want to do it on your own, this whole demo we did here, there is a very nice live lab which does most or even more of those steps, because it also shows you how to copy it to another database and so on. If you want to redo what I showed you today, you just can do it with this live lab, machine learning on autonomous database. So with this, I hand over back to you, Tom.
That came up as one of the questions as well, by the way. Where do you get CSV files? Where do you get the application? Where do you get any of this stuff? It's all freely available. If I remember rightly, another resource is GitHub is a ton of stuff on this as well. But,
exactly.
Worth having a look there. A couple of things. You're probably aware that there is a catalog. It will be updated. We're also shared on the, there's a developer live and the developer pages. In fact, probably most of you have seen it actually over there. It's the same thing, by the way. You can register on either of those links, doesn't really matter. Next week, this is proven really popular as well. Actually, there's a DB migration session. In fact, if I remember rightly, I think I might have seen the presenter for next week on the call here. But so a strong recommendation if you're a bit of a DB person and you're moving data around. That's a really good session to join as well. As I raised before, on the August the 5th, there's your bit.ly page or bit.ly link down the bottom. A strong recommendation on that, by the way. It's well worth going. By the way, a lot of those live labs, you'll get much more detail, kind of like what Patrick was doing today, except expanded. Something I probably should mention, that demo that we delivered is part of a live lab. If you do want to see all of the steps, the ones that Patrick had to just remove today because we've only got an hour, right? So if you do want to see all the steps about loading data and each individual one, you can actually do live labs on that, and they're a strong recommendation on those, by the way. If that's probably, if you want to take it on, I'd nearly recommend that's your next step after this. We have a ton of useful resources now. It's not at this point I'm going to insult everybody's intelligence and let's say read the manual, but some of these are actually pretty good. I'm saying that as a person who doesn't like reading manuals, but there is really good stuff here. Quite a lot of free training floating around as well. Don't ignore that. Like, we're one of many, so feel free to have a scout around for some of that. Finally, that's the email. If you want to contact us, feel free to ping us there if you need a PDF of these slides or something pops up later on. Yep, I guess one of the questions that we do get a bit on some of these is is the machine learning component available in DataWare, the ADW part? Yes, it is, right? So,
yes, it is on both.
Yeah. So sorry, I thought we bumped into that, but I just mentioned it to anybody just because it does come up quite a bit. If people are looking for you do want a link, there is the Live Labs link that you can do a search for that. Actually, it's pretty shared quite a lot in Oracle, actually. So but if you have any difficulty, feel free to email us on that email address, and I watched that, by the way. So if you have any comments, anything you want us to run, let me know. We'll start running sessions on it. Really appreciate all your time today. Thanks for joining. Remember the session next week if it's your thing, and obviously on August 5th as well. And I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks for joining.